Okay, good morning to all. My name is Stefan Wacke. I'm the head of unit for DG Research and Innovation for Financial Instruments in the European Innovation Council Task Force. And we have an interesting panel this morning on green, clean and innovative, what the new EU financing instruments are doing in order to try to help address the sustainability challenge, and in particular investing into green, in particular green energy projects. So I have with me this morning Christian Holzeidner, who is the head of unit responsible for finance, for innovation and land use at DG CLIMA, which, as you know, is going to be at the center of the storm of the new commission since the Green Deal has been put forward very, very prominently by President-elect von der Leyen. So he will maybe also be able to tell us a bit more how DG CLIMA is positioning and addressing this very, very significant challenge. But he will, this morning, make a presentation of the InnovFin Fund, which, of course, is, I would say, one of the flagship funding and financing instruments that DG CLIMA is pushing in order to finance projects across the Union that are meeting this green energy sustainability challenge. We have also with us Julia Reynaud, who is the Director of Advocacy and Government Relations at Gates Ventures. Gates, like in Bill Gates, to be clear, Julia. And she will present a very interesting initiative that we have put together last year between DG Research and Innovation and a number of investors. And Julia will explain how this came about on a new equity fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which Europe is an important element here indeed, which is supposed to help us invest in quite risky, quite early stage projects that are trying also to meet this challenge of investing into a new energy way of producing energy and doing it, of course, with zero emission. And she will tell us where we are in this in the implementation of this new venture. And then finally, I will wrap this up for you by trying to make a quick presentation of an existing instrument that has been delivering now for a number of years, which is called the InnovFin EDP Energy Demonstration Project, which was a debt facility that the Commission used its EU budget to protect the EIB in its lending in order to try to, again, help lending to zero-emission green energy project. And this has been in operation in a number of years. We have already quite a significant pipeline in operation. And then we'll be happy to take a number of questions and answers. So without much further ado, Christian.
Yes. Good morning. Very happy to be here and to tell you a bit about our Innovation Fund. Maybe first, as Stefan already said, a little bit of a political context. So we asked ourselves at the European Commission, is it possible to have in 2050 a European economy that is carbon neutral, so that on balance doesn't emit any more greenhouse gases, so it doesn't contribute anymore to climate change? And the answer is yes, it's possible. And the even better answer is there are many ways how we can get there. We can further reduce our energy consumption, maybe by a third compared to today. We can have 100% decarbonized electricity. We can have new storage facilities, be it batteries, be it hydrogen, demand-side management. Think about the circular economy. Think about the bioeconomy. Think about hydrogen as a feedstock for industry. There are so many possibilities. And also think about sector coupling, how we can bring together electricity, mobility, industry in hubs, like in big industrial hubs, like the Port of Antwerp, the Port of Rotterdam, or the Port of Valencia. So there are a lot of possibilities, and we are very positive about that and very bullish that we can achieve in 2050 a carbon neutral economy. And what we want to do now with the Innovation Fund is we want you as a companies to invest now. We want you to bring all these new innovative technologies, these clean technologies, to the market already now. to introduce them now and not to wait for another 10 years. So if you look today, the carbon price in Europe is between 25 and 30 euros. A lot of these technologies cost 60, 70, 80 euros maybe to abate 1 ton of carbon. So there's still a substantial gap. And what we can do with the Innovation Fund, we can finance up to 60% of that gap. So what we want to do is to bring these technologies to the market now and to keep them on the market until the 2030s, until the market conditions, the regulatory conditions have changed such that all these technologies are viable by themselves. So if we look a bit on what is the Innovation Fund, what are the key features? So we will be there for at least for the next 10 years until 2030, and we expect to have a volume of at least 10 billion euros. From where does this money come? The money comes from the EU emission trading system. So we set aside a certain amount of allowances that we will auction, and we will use the revenues for the Innovation Fund. So the volume that we will have will depend on the carbon price. These 10 billion are calculated at a carbon price of 20. If the carbon price goes to 40, we will have double the amount. And you see the double effect. We will have more money, but by itself the projects will become more profitable because of the higher carbon price. So what I also said already before is we can cover 60% of the additional costs due to the innovation. So compare a steel factory, a conventional one, with one based on hydrogen. From this cost difference, we can cover 60%. And the important thing is, and I think that's an attractive feature, is we can not only cover the capital costs, but also the additional operating costs up to 10 years. And here you see really what we want to achieve. We want to keep this company going on the market. We want to bridge the gap until 2030. So we are not interested in demonstration projects itself that will close down after 2 years. No, we really want to see this company surviving on the market, and that we want to support. We want to go fast, so we want to have our first call already in 2020, probably around 1 billion, and then we want to have annual calls until 2030. So we will be there for quite some time, and I think we want to be very flexible to respond to the needs of the projects. And as you see, we are very open across all low-carbon technologies, be it renewables, be it CCS, be it in any energy-intensive industry, including substitute products. So it could be also very interesting for us to look into the use of harvested wood products, anything innovative there, and of course energy storage. So we really also want to look into batteries and hydrogens and other innovative means of storing energy. So if we go to the next slide, and this is one of my favorite slides always, how do we position the Innovation Fund? So we want to have a very specific position to be as a first of a kind application of a technology at industrial scale. So what we want to do is we want to take these projects that come from Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe, or maybe that got introduced, as said before, by Breakthrough Energy Europe, and then we scale them up to a big industrial mass. So we are not afraid of putting like 100, 200, 300 million into one project. So we are really here for flagship projects and to really help you to make a market success. And so I think this is as much about climate policy, because we want to reduce emissions fast, but as much about an industrial strategy for Europe, so that we are a leader in these technologies, a global leader, and that we can give the example to the fast-growing economies in Asia, to China, to India, to Indonesia, that a different form, a more sustainable economy without fossil fuels is possible. Another thing is we can finance up to 60% of the additional costs, but that may in many cases not be sufficient. So we are very open to cooperate with other instruments, like with InnovFin EDP or with the Future Invest EU. We from the Innovation Fund, we can take a lot of the gap and the risk and make it more attractive for other investors to also support our projects. So, and this is something we feel very strongly about, is that we have projects that are well financed. And we want, when we give our grant, our money, that these projects can go ahead quite quickly. And you will also see that in a lot of these projects, if you talk about CCS, hydrogen, you have to create more or less new markets, a new value chain, a new infrastructure. So this is also why it's important that we see the links, for example, with the Connecting Europe facility. If you take CCS, I think a role for the Innovation Fund can be to finance the capture facility. But then you need all the infrastructure. You need the pipes, maybe the ships, and then the storage. So that there could be a role for member states for the Connecting Europe facility. So I think a lot, because we have to create new markets, we really have to see how can we bring all of these investors together. So this is also why, with our selection criteria, it's as much about the technology as the business case. We want to look at both. So we want to have projects that can reduce substantial amounts of emissions, are innovative, but also at the same time have a good proof of the viability. If we put in 200 million euros, we want to be sure that this project goes ahead. So we will put a lot of emphasis on the due diligence of projects. As I said before, we want to start next year. So to prepare this first call, we are now doing a series of workshops across all industries. So we already had workshops with steel, chemicals. We had a big workshop in Oslo on CCS. We will have next Monday a big workshop on hydrogen here in Brussels. Then we have a series of workshops also in the member states. Then we want to go into a discussion with stakeholders more. Okay, how do we define these 5 criteria in more detail? So I would also invite you to take part. We have everything on our website, EU Climate Action. We are very active on Twitter. We want to be very transparent to see, okay, how can we best do this first call, that we get really the most attractive projects, the ones that are viable, that we can quickly finance, but on the other hand, also promising projects that may not yet be fully ready, maybe on the business side, on the financing side, where we then can offer project development assistance. And as I said before, we are here for 10 years. So we really also, I mean, we want to give a certain, I think, certain certainty, certain security, that if you are now more in the startup phase, there will be somebody in 25 who can take your project and scale it up big time. So this is our proposition, and thanks for your attention.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Reno. As Stéphane mentioned, I work for Gates Ventures, which is Bill Gates' private office. And out of Gates Ventures and out of the private office, Bill Gates, with a number of other investors, set up a few years ago something called Breakthrough Energy. And we've been very pleased over the past year to be working very closely with the European Commission and also in partnership with the European Investment Bank in order to create something called Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe, which is a pilot 100 million euro fund that we are in the process now of setting up. It's legally established in Europe. And the idea is that this fund will work like a venture fund, but committed to investing in some of the best European companies that are developing solutions that are key to driving emission reductions. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the fund, of course, but also about the genesis behind the fund, because it's very important for us to explain a little bit the philosophy behind why such a venture fund and what is the particularity of it. So let me start just, context setting. I think everyone hopefully is familiar with this. One of the major challenges of our time is climate change. And so, we're seeing the impact of it on our everyday lives, but equally we're also seeing big changes, and particularly in Europe, but also in other countries, about this commitment to go to close to net zero emissions, or to completely eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. And this is key. And we have a lot of the technologies that we need in order to bring us on that trajectory. But it's also clear that we need to invest in new technologies and in new solutions in order to get to net zero. We talk about in the climate community about hard to abate sectors. Those for whom those technologies or those solutions that we need are not yet on the market. Christian was talking about carbon capture, usage, and storage. It's not necessarily that the technologies are not there, but the business models might not be there. So the genesis behind Breakthrough Energy, at COP21, a number of countries and the European Commission committed to doubling their public funding in clean energy innovation under an initiative called Mission Innovation. And that commitment is continuing. The initiative is indeed those countries that have pledged to be part of Mission Innovation are on the track of doubling, or we hope to be on the track of doubling. And at the same time, Bill Gates, people like Hasso Plattner from Germany, or Jack Ma from China, committed to invest actually in accelerating and in scaling the amounts of technologies that go from labs, research labs, company labs, onto the market. And so thinking about really what is the philosophy behind how do you help what is today in the labs and bring that to market at scale. So they committed to invest in a different way that is more aligned with the types of and the amounts of capital that you need in order to get to those technology onto the market. Christian again was mentioning the scale of the Innovation Fund, which is very impressive, but also more aligned with the technology development cycle. There's the timeline around storage is around solar, for example, is more one of 20, 30, 40 years, so thinking about how do you have investors that are patient and flexible and align more with the technology development cycles that are needed for more of these deep technologies. So at COP21, you had Breakthrough Energy Coalition that was created alongside Mission Innovation. And then a year later, we decided with the European Commission and with 4 other countries to see how we could pilot innovatively between public and the private sector. And so Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe is the genesis of that, where you had a commitment from the European Commission to wanting to be innovative in its approach of how to work with the private sector. And on the other hand, the private sector, represented in this case by Breakthrough Energy, really wanting to try and work very closely with governments that have the know-how in terms of where to do the best research, which are the best research areas, what are the technologies that are being developed, and how do you align public and private capital in that way. So the last thing I wanted to say is that it's just in terms of the genesis, it's not just about investing, early investment. It's also around how do you invest in those companies, technology providers, in a way that allows them to build up the companies that will be able to scale and will be able to commercialize their new products in Europe, but also elsewhere. So the setup, if you will, of Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe and the setup of one of the co-investors, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, is twofold. One is to start from the perspective of science and technology. So there's a science and technology team, and all of those are, really looking at very closely at the science, the IPCC. What do the scientists tell us in terms of what are some of those technology and priority areas that we need in order to decarbonize completely? And then on the other hand, you have another part of the team that is company builders, investors, those who know how to take those companies and those researchers and bring them out of the labs in order to scale into new, very large companies. So Breakthrough Energy Ventures is a pilot. It's endowed by 50 million from the European Commission through the EIB, which is guaranteed then by InnovFin EDP that Stéphane will talk about. And it's 50 million from Breakthrough Energy Ventures. So it's $1 billion plus dollar fund, the one that I was mentioning, where my boss is an investor along with others, other international investors. Now, some principles of how Breakthrough Energy Ventures works in terms of principles for investment. As I mentioned, it starts all with the science and it starts all with the technology. So really this criteria of how much GHG emissions can be abated, what is the potential related to a family of technologies. So for example, in the steel sector, they've invested in a company called Boston, sorry, I've forgotten the name. Boston Metals, sorry, that is developing breakthrough technologies in process technologies in the steel making. But it is also looking at other of the four other sectors that we know are emitting greenhouse gas emissions: agriculture, electricity and energy, industry, transportation, and buildings. So what's important is Breakthrough Energy Ventures will not just focus on the energy sector and electricity, but really on all of the sectors that emit, but focusing particularly on the energy aspects. So the science and the technology is the first criteria. The second is, of course, Breakthrough Energy Ventures can't do this alone, and nor can this pilot fund. 100 million is good capital, but it's not enough. So the second principle is really around co-investment and having co-investors. The third is around the scientific possibility, making sure that the technology is not going to fail once it starts to demonstrate. And then the last is filling in the gaps. Clean tech is an area where there aren't enough venture investors, but it's clear that there are already some, and there are business models that the venture fund community is already investing in. So we want to make sure that this fund invests in areas where actually it's more hard to get patient and flexible capital. So some examples of what Breakthrough Energy Ventures has invested in. For example, in the storage area, it's looked at companies that can look at new technologies for hydro. Okay, instead of looking at pumped hydro, where you need, more of a mountain-like, they're investing in a company. They've invested in a company called Quidnet that is looking at flat surfaces and pumping in water in wells under high pressure, thanks to renewable energy, which can then, be released when there's a need for. Another company is Form Energy that is looking at long-duration storage with new types of chemicals. But it's also looking at the industrial sectors such as cement and steel. So again, there are some portfolio companies that have been made, the investments that have been made there. So this is more to give you an example of the types of companies and the types of investment that have been done in this global fund, and then what we might see emerging in Europe. So to conclude, how will BEV work? Again, investing across the 5 sectors, looking to invest as broad as possible, not just early stage, but looking at what are the types of companies at the different stages of maturity that offer this notion of solutions that can be scaled and that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It'll provide more patient capital than we see in other venture funds, which is very important, again, to being able to align with the technology development cycles. And investments are expected to start as soon as there are a team in place, hopefully end of this year. We will see if that brings us to early next year. And the investments will be made in European-based companies or in countries that have an association with Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020. So stay tuned. As I mentioned previously, we're actively setting up the team and look forward to answering any questions you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia, for this presentation on BEV-E, as we call in our internal jargon in the Commission. Now I will take you back to, I would say, today, or maybe a bit the past, which is one of the pioneer instruments that we have developed in this field of clean energy technology, which is the InnovFin Energy Demonstration Project, or EDP in our jargon. Basically, we identified in the year 2016 that there was going to be a gap of about 4 billion euros in terms of investment in early demonstration project, first-of-a-kind project in the energy field, in the clean energy field. And therefore, we decided to put together with the EIB this new instrument, which is basically financed out of the EU budget through the Innofin financial instrument, which is the financial instrument of Horizon 2020. And the idea here is to try to bridge the valley of gap, the valley of death between demonstration and commercialization by demonstrating that technologies actually are possible from a technical and commercial perspective, and therefore put them on track to then be taken up by the market independently of public support, which has been the idea. And I see that this has actually been similar philosophy on the side of the Innovation Fund. So we are very happy to see now the increase in budget that the Innovation Fund will bring in order to have more firepower to apply basically the same philosophy. Basically, the scope has been enlarged progressively now to include more or less every sector or every technologies that help clean energy, including, for example, batteries or smart grids, except nuclear energy that is not included, and investment in technologies in manufacturing are also possible. What we provide through, or what the IB provide through InnovFin EDP are loans or quasi-equity type of support up to 50% of a project cost, which is the normal way for the IB to provide support for investment projects. So it means that the promoter of the project has to come up somehow with the other 50%. I'll say a couple of words later when we see the overall picture here, because that, of course, is not an easy proposition. And therefore, of course, we have leverage not only, I mean, two things with the IB that is important why we are in partnership with them. First of all, the IB is very good at analyzing projects and at identifying also their value from when it comes to climate. I mean, they have developed very good methodologies there. And therefore, that gives, if you wish, a kind of a stamp of approval, a label that is very now reputable across the market in Europe, whether this project actually will deliver clean energy possibilities. But of course, the other aspect is that by bringing 50% of the investment cost, the EIB closes, I would say, a major part of the investment gap on this project, which usually the rest of the money is covered by equity from the project promoter or by additional funds that come from maybe other financiers, banks and so on, that then are reassured by the presence of the bank. Of course, the bank has been able to do that because we have covered the risk of the bank entirely, 100%, in those operations. And this has been, of course, the recipe for the success of this initiative and this instrument. So far, we have supported 350 million projects. You're going to see a map of this project. So again, 50% applies, so it means that 170 million of it has been provided with EU support. As you can see, we have covered a number of sectors: wave energy, photovoltaics, batteries, offshore wind, electric mobility, hydrogen, fuel cells. And as you can see, we have quite a nice geographical spread across Europe, from north to south, east to west. So we're quite happy that the instrument has actually delivered. What does it mean concretely for the future? Of course, you all, as I said in my introduction, you're aware of President-elect von der Leyen's very strong emphasis on the Green Deal. And if we go more into the detail, the mention of a sustainable investment plan for Europe, triggering 1 trillion euro of investment over a 10-year period from 2021 to 2030. This will mean that we will have to generate about 80 billion euros of additional investment per year. And of course, all this within the commitments that the EU and all the member states have taken within the Paris Agreement. So this very increased level of ambition will have to rely on the instruments that we have presented to you now. Now, you may be a bit confused by the proliferation of instruments, so we thought it would be useful to try to summarize those instruments and how they interact with one another. So basically, obviously, Horizon 2020 grants, when we look in particular at research and at the emergence of potential projects, this is done usually through grants. Some of these demonstration projects, of course, are tested in the natural environment, and they reach a maximum of 25 million. They are normally implemented by consortia involving universities, RTOs, or industrials. And here we will continue, of course, to intensify under Horizon Europe our contribution that we make there. Then new element, new kid on the block is the appearance of the innovation fund that will appear both at the level of grants and also at the level of financial instruments. But let's say that I would say it appears here at the level of grants. The idea here is to try to bring closer those solutions to the market, as it was explained by Christian earlier, to provide one-off demonstration grants in order to make it possible then for the market to close the market gap that is perceived by the investor in particular because of the energy, the ETS price that continues to be seen maybe by the market as an impediment to investment. And that, of course, will be adjusted and tailor-made on project needs. And then, of course, EDP, which, of course, will operate to a certain extent also close by to where the innovation fund space is operating, is to continue to be operating at the first of a kind demonstration project at commercial scales. Here, of course, we are limited to up to 75 million. And here, it's a demand-driven, of course, instrument, and we rely on projects brought to by companies to us. And then at the level of the equity, we have the Bve Initiative that is supposed to invest into startups and early stage companies and bring very risky technologies to the point where they can demonstrate the validity of their clean energy projects. And of course, that will operate also to a certain extent, but not, I would say, to a great extent. This is something that we have to see in implementation with the EIC accelerator that provides grants and equity, blended finance, and that will also aim at providing in a bottom-up approach project that operating on clean energy as well, and will provide in the form of equity the possibility of investment, but this time from the Commission and not from Bve. How this is supposed to work all together, you may be, I would say, a bit astonished by the overlaps of the number of different initiatives that the Commission tried to push forward on that space. But I think that what you need to see is that those initiatives have a number of overlaps, but given the needs of the sectors we are talking about here, we are still falling short with public money of the needs that we see appearing on the market to meet, in particular, the targets, either the very ambitious targets of President-elect von der Leyen, or the targets needed in order to fulfill the Paris Agreement. So I think we need to always bring it down to what we are trying to aim at, and here those initiatives are still going to need to leverage considerable private investment in order to deliver the very high level of ambition that we set for ourselves in order to make Europe a climate neutral continent by the year 2050. In practice, since we managed to put this show in front of you today, I can assure you that we are working in very, very close coordination on almost a daily basis. And the instruments that we are developing them together. And therefore, the information flow, the information in particular about the projects, their validity, their operational aspect, their ability to be, I would say, implemented is subject of a constant exchange between the different instruments, in particular with those that are not with us today, that are working directly on the market, which are basically our colleagues in the Bve Initiative or in the EIB. So therefore, this level, a very high level of coordination that you don't see is very much the recipe for the success. And that we have, for example, demonstrated with InnovFin EDP, who benefits from the ancestor from the Innovation Fund, which is the NER 300, some of you may be aware of, that has made a major contribution to InnovFin EDP, and that now we're managing together with DG CLIMA in a very seamless manner. So that's what we wanted to tell you in this presentation, but I think that you also came today to this session to be able to get answers to your questions. So now we'll have a question and answer session. Maybe if I can ask Julia and Christian to come and join me on the panel, and I can open the floor for questions, please. I'm trying to see you also. I see a question there.
To Christian Hoslein, on the Innovation Fund, does that include agriculture, handling the emissions from cows and so on?
Our focus is clearly on the big energy and industrial emitters. Steel, chemicals, CCS, hydrogen. But we are open to everything. I mean, the focus is on the sectors that are under the emission trading system. But as I said before, like sector coupling, looking also at value change. The Commission is coming up with this initiative, Farm to Fork, Sustainable Food Policy. So I think there are a lot of interlinkages, and in particular, if we talk about the bioeconomy, we have to talk more about the whole value chain. So maybe it's not like a focus for our first call, but I'm very open to further develop this, and also as the policies go along. And I think for bioeconomy, as I said, that's a very important one, that we have a look at the whole value chain, what we can do there to have a carbon neutral food value chain. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may add to this, and I think it's the same philosophy across all these instruments, we are trying to be as open to the emergence of new technological solutions as possible. And you cannot possibly, from Brussels, dictate which areas or which technological solution needs to come. You can just be welcoming to any of them as long as they deliver value in view of the objective. And this is the approach that we all have followed. So we remain relatively neutral and open whenever, I mean, it's in terms of the sector of the technological solution that is being proposed. But I saw that there was another one in front of you. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I am investment advisor and former high-level policymaker as well, who was responsible also for industrial policy. I would have a question for Julia. Can you explain and expound on co-investment? What do you understand exactly under co-investment, and how will Venture Europe benefit from the EIB capital injection, or will this be portfolio finance guarantees? Will this be capital? And what criteria will you apply to that? So this is one question. Now I would have a question for you, if you permit. Who will decide on a proof of viability? This is very important. Who will be eligible? And who will actually implement? As I understood from Julia, it's EIB that will implement. And in what form will it implement? Because what we understand is that InvestEU, basically, it's nothing else for EIB but increase of their risk capacity. So this is why I would like to ask you if you can expound on that. And what are basically the policy objectives? Will public also be able to enjoy economic benefits from it? And how did you envisage that? And if not,
that's
in
a lot
which
of
way?
questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Because we're already forgetting the first one, so I mean...
Sorry, may I just ask, though, that you repeat the question to me? Sorry, just the beginning, I'm sorry.
Can you expound on what do you understand under co-investment?
Sure.
And how will Venture Europe, your venture fund, dedicated venture fund, benefit from the EIB capital, financial guarantees? In which way?
Okay. So with regards to co-investment, I mean, most of the, I think if not all, of the companies in which Breakthrough Energy Ventures has invested in has co-investors. So it's when there's a deal, for example, for when there's a company that's looking for seed or catalytic funds, or in going into Series A round of investments, or B, you know, in terms of the amounts of money it needs, Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe will not go in there alone. It needs other investors. So that's what I mean in terms of co-investors. And I think, not being a fund manager myself or an investor, I understand that that's mostly basic practice of how those things are done in order to be able to scale and to limit the risks for one venture fund, for a fund itself.
Yeah, Julia, maybe I can help you out on the second question. But to expand on that one, of course, BEV-E, and actually it's the same for the EIC in terms of the blended finance, when we inject equity, we will, at the level of the project, at the level of the company that is implementing the project, when we take an equity stake, this will be done, of course, with other investors at the project level. What your question maybe was alluding to is that will there be in BEV, at the level of the equity fund, possibility for other investors to come in? It's a possibility that we have kept open at this stage. We have a number of investors, and not only Bill Gates as part of this. There are 21 investors, 20 investors with Bill Gates with us as the European Commission. And of course, this is an evolutive structure that could be enlarged to include other investors at the level of the equity fund, not only at the level of the equity project. But of course, at the level of the project, by definition, you always need co-investors in order to be able to invest. We are not going to, of course, through this equity funds, take the only stake at the level of the equity to invest. The other part that you said, we are pari passu. We are sharing the benefits and the liabilities equally between the group of investors of Breakthrough Energy Ventures and the European Commission here. So we are not in any way taking a junior role vis-à-vis through the IB or not through the IB vis-à-vis those private investors here. We are fundamentally here on an equal footing. The idea here is that we are operating in a space in which we are looking for real commercial opportunities, which therefore by definition are operating a bit different, in a different space in view of the Innovation Fund and EDP, for example, where we're providing basically coverage in case something goes wrong and we are taking it on ourselves. So we're putting our money on the line much earlier than anybody else. Here, it's not the case. We are on a purely commercial basis, basically reaping to a large extent and hopefully the benefits of what has been tested either under Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020, Future Horizon Europe with grants, or maybe under the Innovation Fund or under EDP with reinforced public support, though it is, of course, a commercial operation led by an investor. So this is a bit the philosophy here. We are entering, if you wish, the real commercial field, even if it is, of course, of a much riskier nature in terms of project. But please, Christian, you had quite a lot of questions for yourself.
Yes. I think, as I said before, we are doing now a lot of workshops. We are very open to consultation with the stakeholders, and we want to see where can we, as the Innovation Fund, be most helpful. And as I also said before, we need to have a good link to other EU programs, like the Connecting Europe facility. I think that's for hydrogen, for CCS, very important to get the infrastructure component. Then we also need to be close to other financial instruments, as the Future Invest EU, as the InnovFin EDP, as equity funds. So we are now trying to see what is the optimal governance. How can we combine the strength that we have, the knowledge that we have from Horizon 2020, from Horizon Europe, so the knowledge that our executive agencies have that are running these programs, together with the knowledge that the EIB has, and as Stefan said, they are very much into from the Innofin EDP, and it's kind of a good stamp to say, okay, I passed the EIB assessment. So how will that be also in the future setup with the Invest EU, with more implementing partners? So we are looking at that, and we should soon come to a conclusion where exactly we get the governance right. And then, for us, it's very much, as you said, will there be economic benefits for the consumer, for anybody? Yes, this is what we want to do. We want to get an economy that in 2030 works without subsidies, but we want the European companies to invest now. And I think our economies will look very different in 2030, also from the regulatory side. But I think also if you see at the cost decreases that we've seen with solar, with wind, and what analysts predict, for example, for batteries, and if you have the same development on hydrogen, on very other technologies, so we really hope that we can kickstart a viable, sustainable, climate-neutral economy. And I think we are believing very much that from 2030, from 2040, can work without subsidies.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We are getting very close now to the end of this session. Yes, I see one here.
Okay, my name is Michael. I come from a small company that provides services to the industry. It's a very short question. Is it possible for consortia to apply for example, for any of these type of money? Because from your slide, Stefan, it seemed that you couldn't. It was only businesses, but a consortium of businesses, could they apply?
Well, I mean, if we are talking about money that goes to the radar range of an equity fund, I mean, of course, a consortium may come with an interesting project, but in order for the equity fund to invest into it, it will have to be incorporated in the form of a company, so it becomes an investable project. I'm not entirely sure for the Innovation Fund. I think probably
I think most what we see are single beneficiaries, but we are open to consortia. So different industries have different approaches. From one or two industries, we heard that they would be interested in setting up more like a consortia approach. But most what we see is really single beneficiaries. It's as it's very close to the market. That seems to be the case.
But I think, I mean, to answer your question, don't be discouraged by the fact that you need to be incorporated. It's the same story with the EIC accelerator. We support mono beneficiaries, so meaning SMEs. But of course, a lot of what these SMEs are implementing comes from the research side that has been basically pioneered in the form of a consortium. So I think if you have such a project, come and talk to us. So like this, we can see how we can help you to make the jump, because that's another valley of death that we are fundamentally aware of, that the EIC is also trying to address, which is the valley of death from research and technology development up to commercialization in the form of creating a company. So I mean, by all means, come with your project to us, and we will try to see how we can find the best support mechanism in order to get you to the next stage. If there is one last question here, and then we can close.
Hello, not really a question, just a quick comment. I really liked your picture of the different funding instruments. I would suggest that you also add CEF to it.
Yes. It will be done.
You had it on Christian's
Yes.
slide. But I agree, when we were setting up Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe, thinking about all of the instruments and the passages of how, if you're a company or a researcher, you know, how do you go from one instrument to another? What types of products? How yeah.
Yeah, that allows me to conclude by saying that under InvestEU, we are working very closely with the colleagues managing CEF to see how we can even improve our offer on EDP, and not only take the input that is coming from DG CLIMA on this particular large manufacturing facilities that needs to be helped to decarbonize, and we are very interested in developing that line of business also on the side of basically the financial instrument arm of the Innovation Fund. This is basically what it is, that will come under InvestEU, but also to make sure that we have a connection on deployment, because a lot of these projects are somewhere in between. They are somewhere in between first of a kind demonstration and already have a foot, if not a leg, on deployment, and that of course is covered by our colleagues doing CEF. So here the discussions are very far advanced, and the EIB is already advertising it, I heard, as a kind of a joint operation in the making, as to develop, I would say, a joint approach when it comes to these developments. And of course, we very much welcome that, since it will make it even more seamless from the point of view of the applicants to be supported. So thank you very much. Very rich discussion. Thank you for that. And I encourage you to stay here for the next one, which will be looking at venture capital. Thank you.